So if you hang around in the data engineering world, you're going to hear two acronyms thrown around all the time, ETL and ELT. I mean, they look almost identical, right? But that one little letter swap, well, it represents a massive, and I mean massive, technological revolution. Okay, let's dive into this and really unpack what it all means.
So that's the big question we're tackling today, right? Why did we flip those letters around? What on earth happened that made us go from TL to LT? It might seem like just a tiny change in the jargon, but trust me, it completely re-architected how modern companies work with data.
Okay, so before we can really get into why things changed, we've got to understand the basic ingredients. It doesn't matter which acronym you're using, every single data pipeline is built from the same three core actions: extract, transform, and load. Let's break down what each one actually is.
All right, first up is extract. Super simple. This is just about grabbing your data from wherever it lives. Could be APIs, databases, SaaS tools like Salesforce. Then you've got transform. Think of this as the cleanup phase. You're filtering things, maybe adding numbers up, joining different sources together, or even hiding sensitive info. And finally, load. This is the last stop on the journey, where you take that nice, prepared data and you write it to its final destination, like a data warehouse.
Now, let's rewind the clock and talk about how these pieces were first put together in the original blueprint, ETL, extract, transform, load. For decades, this was the undisputed king, the standard way of doing things, and honestly, for some very, very good reasons.
Now, this is the most important part to get about ETL. The order is everything. You extract the data, but then the transformation happens right away on its own separate processing server before that data ever even sees the inside of the warehouse. Only the clean, prepped, and transformed data actually gets loaded in.
So you might be thinking, why do it this way? It sounds complicated. And you'd be right. But there was a really, really good reason for it, and it all comes down to money. Back in the day, with on-premise data warehouses, storage space and computing power were crazy expensive. You couldn't just dump all your messy, raw data in there. You'd go broke. You had to clean it, shrink it, and make it as small and efficient as possible first.
But as you can imagine, this old-school method had some pretty big headaches. ETL processes were known for what's called high latency, which is just a fancy way of saying they were slow. A lot of times, they just run once overnight. The pipelines were also super rigid. If some analyst needed just one new piece of information from the source, an engineer had to go back and completely rewrite the whole pipeline. A total pain.
Now, don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean ETL is dead. Not at all. In fact, there's one area where it's not just useful, it's absolutely critical: strict compliance. Think about regulations like GDPR or HIPAA. You might be legally required to strip out or mask personal information before it even lands in your system. In that case, transforming first isn't a choice, it's a must.
And then everything changed. About a decade ago, a massive shift happened that just blew the old way of thinking out of the water. And that shift was, you guessed it, the cloud. This is where our story takes a major turn.
Yeah, you can really think of this as two completely different eras. In Era 1, we had these clunky, expensive on-premise warehouses with fixed limits. But then, boom, Era 2 hits with the arrival of these incredibly powerful, scalable cloud data warehouses. We're talking about tools like Snowflake, Google BigQuery, and Amazon Redshift.
And just like that, the old rules didn't apply anymore. The chains were off. In the cloud, storage became dirt cheap, and computing power, it became elastic. You could scale it up or down and only pay for what you actually used. That old pressure to clean the data first to save space, it just vanished.
So with these new superpowers of cheap storage and massive compute, a whole new way of doing things was born. Welcome to the modern workflow, ELT, extract, load, transform. By just flipping those last two steps, we unlocked a way of working with data that is so much faster and way more flexible.
So here's how it works now. You extract the data, just like before. But then, and this is the game changer, you immediately load it raw and messy and all straight into the cloud data warehouse. All the transformation, all the cleaning, all the modeling, that now happens inside the warehouse itself using the powerhouse language of data, SQL.
And the payoff for doing this? Oh, it was huge, and it happened right away. First, speed. Your data is ready for analysis almost instantly. Second, agility. This is the big one. Data engineers can just focus on getting the data in, and the analysts, the people who actually know the business questions, they're empowered to do their own transformations. The engineering bottleneck? gone. Plus, and this is a lifesaver, you always have that raw data to go back to if someone makes a mistake in the logic.
Okay, so that's the old world versus the new world. Let's put them head to head to really lock in the differences and get to our final verdict.
When you look at them side by side, you can see how that one single decision, where you do the transformation, changes everything. With ETL, because you're transforming in transit on some other server, you create a delay. It's slow. But with ELT, you move the transformation in warehouse. So you're using the beast of an engine you're already paying for, making it super fast. And of course, this completely flips the cost model from paying for dedicated servers to the pay-as-you-go model of the cloud.
Okay, so after all that, it's pretty clear ELT has a ton of advantages, which leads to the big question everyone's thinking. Is the old ETL model just obsolete now?
And the answer is, well, it's a little more complicated than a simple yes or no. For sure, ELT is the new king of the castle. It's the default standard for what we call the modern data stack because it's just faster and more agile. But like we talked about, ETL is still absolutely vital. It is the right choice for those high security and compliance situations, and sometimes it's the only choice when you're dealing with older legacy systems.
So in the end, that simple little flip of 2 letters from ETL to ELT is so much more than just a technical tweak. It's really a totally different way of thinking about data. The big question we ask ourselves has changed. It's not just about how we process our data anymore. It's about where we empower our people to do that incredibly valuable work of transformation.